he left behind an extraordinary legacy of poetry, translation, and cultural criticism that will continue to inspire us and those who follow us. We have gathered here today, family, friends, colleagues, to celebrate the life and art of one of the great poetic voices of our time, and to remember the ways in which he occupies such a special place in our minds and in our hearts. Born in Poznan in 1946, Stanisław, by the mid-60s, had become one of the leading young poets of a protest movement that came to be known as the New Wave. The art produced had to be published underground to avoid official censorship. He notes in an early essay about how this poetry used what he called contaminated language, the stifling words of newspeak, to expose the shallowness and lies of government ideology, undercutting the authority of the regime with its own forms of expression. After the food riots of June 1976, Stanisław helped to organize the Workers' Defense Committee, CORE, the predecessor of Solidarity, and to found the secret journal Zapis, actions that resulted in his being fired from his teaching position at Adam Mickiewicz University in his hometown. He didn't view this result as completely negative. It gave him more time to do what he loved most, to write. In the introduction of The Weight of the Body, he offered a characteristically ironic perspective on poetry itself. Poetry, he said, has always been a desperate call for fair play, for sticking to the human/humane rules of the game. The fact that the game's partner, nature, an oppressive regime, death, history, God himself, is not necessarily human, much less humane, does not really matter. The poet is a tenant who reluctantly admits that yes, he should have read the fine print before signing the lease, but it is also cocky enough to insist that fine print or not, he does not deserve to be treated by his landlord like dirt. Poetry is always some kind of protest. It does not really matter whether the pain is inflicted by a policeman's truncheon or by the realization of the inevitability of death. Whatever the world treats him with, the poet reacts the same way. He tries against all odds and all logic to defend his human birth. Invited to teach at Harvard in 1978, details to follow from Donald Finger, Stanisław endured 7 rejected requests to travel abroad by the Polish government before finally receiving permission to leave in March of 1981, prior to the imposition of martial law. The Harvard Crimson announced his coming with the headline, "No, no, 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 yes!" An originally 3-year commitment would become a commitment for life. In contemplating the range and depth of his artistry, we must remind ourselves that nearly half of his life was spent in America. Stanisław's fascination with language, combined with poetic genius, led him happily to translation, through which he served as a cultural intermediary between English and Polish, translating inter alia George Herbert, John Donne, William Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, John Keats, W.H. Auden, Seamus Heaney, and Dr. Seuss. Among his most notable Polish translations into English are the Jan Kochanowski Cycle of Elegies, Laments, with Seamus Heaney, and the poetry of Wisława Szymborska with Claire Cavanaugh. My colleague Joanna Nizinska has described his translations as, quote, masterpieces of craft and invention, immediately recognizable as Barańczakian for their matchless rhythm and rhyming. Never translate good poetry into bad poetry was his motto. If you cannot translate Akhmatova's measures, you better turn your attention to cultivating cacti. Stanisław had an interesting, conflicted response when an Artful Dodge interviewer asked which aspect of his poetry was most difficult to translate. He said, "I write poems which contain puns, or variations on puns. I appreciate when a translator tries to cope with one, but I'm satisfied with perhaps 10 or 20% of such translations. I am tempted to say that it is virtually impossible to translate such a poem, although to say that would be contradicting myself, because as a translator, I cannot accept that certain types of poems are untranslatable. Even the most untranslatable poetry can be rendered into another language if the translator is imaginative enough. In his most admirable love of wordplay and punning, Stanisław, nasz Staszek, most certainly belongs to the philosophical tradition that includes Marx and Lenin. That's Groucho and John, not Karl and Vladimir Ilyich. With the love and support of Anna, Stanisław was able to achieve his artistic destiny. Playful, courageous, ironic, subtle, inventive, and razor-sharp, he gave us in all too short a lifetime a prodigious outpouring of brilliant poetry, translations and essays that will endure. His 10th volume of poetry, Chirurgiczna Precyzja, Surgical Precision, 1998, earned him the Nike Prize in 1999, Poland's most prestigious literary honor. In the fall of 2006, the rector of Jagiellonian University came to Harvard to bestow an honorary doctorate degree on Stanisław at a ceremony with faculty in full academic regalia. Poland had fully embraced its son with highest honors. And now I turn the floor over to those who have known Stanisław best.
A Renaissance man, poet, critic, translator between cultures and languages. If he seemed to have read everything, I'm convinced that was because, in fact, he had. His mother, yes, of course, which is not unprecedented at Harvard, was genuine. But in this case, however arcane the artist or work being talked about, it was genuine. He ranged freely over poetic forms, poetic traditions, historical eras, because when engaged with the written word, he was in his element. It was the air he lived in, it was the element he moved in, and that written word could follow the rules of nonsense as easily as a tragedy. Nothing verbal was alien to him. How could his students and colleagues not cherish the gifts of this astonishing young man? Because he was a young man when he arrived at Harvard in 1981. He was 33 years old and remained one throughout his active life. He was deeply serious but never solemn. He was fun and he was mischievous. I could go on in this vein, but I will not for two reasons. One is that what I would go on to say is well known to virtually everyone here, and also because my time is limited, and I think primarily as a kind of witness to history, that is, as a deputy of Father Time, if not Father Time himself. And so I want to fill you in general on how it was that we came to get Staszek to Harvard. His predecessor in the Urzikowski chair, Victor Weintraub, was due to retire at the age of 70 in June of 1978. And Victor had singled him out as an extraordinary candidate for his replacement in that chair. Therefore, it seemed appropriate for the department of which I was then chairman to invite him to come and visit, to look us over, and to be looked over. And he apparently showed every interest in doing that, but the first of his denials of a passport took place then because of his nonconformism, that is, his anti-government activities. After scratching our heads and consulting, we decided in the department that the thing to do was to send the department chairman from Cambridge to Warsaw and then Poznań. And so we did, and I went in early 1978 with a stash of blank department stationery in my pocket, so that if, as happened, he and I agreed on the terms of his coming, and if he was ready to sign, we could then type up these documents and have his signature, and I could take them back with me, since there was good reason not to trust the postal service. When he agreed on the spot, embassy clerks in Warsaw typed his acceptance letter over his signature as a 3-year associate professor. and I carried it back to Harvard. The official appointment went through that spring, and Stanisław Barańczak's name appeared in the catalog for 1978-79. Alas, he held that position in absentia from July of 1978 until the spring of 1981, when he began to draw salary, and when finally, in March of 81, he arrived. I have a little note to myself here saying, describe the process of waiting. It seemed to be endless. There were Ambassador Spasowski in Washington refused to answer letters from President Bach of Harvard. It took 1 year to get any sort of response from the Polish embassy to Derek Bach's urgent letter. And then in November of 79, the Polish Foreign Ministry responded to the latest Harvard letter by saying that it, quote, has nothing to add to previous statements, which is there were none, beyond reporting that Barańczak is not a recognized scholar, only a troublemaker. Their list, they then proceeded to send us a list of 6 qualified scholars. I will not read their names, because they're not appropriate here, but I will quote the heart of their letter after they give them. This is from one Stanisław Pawliszewski, chargé d'affaires at the embassy. All those candidates are eminent and known scholars with rich experience as lecturers in foreign universities, including U.S. universities. They also command good knowledge of English language. I hope that our offer of 6 outstanding Polish scholars in Polish literature and history for a post of associate professor in Slavic languages and literature at Harvard University will make it possible for the university to choose the one whom it considers best suited for the job. We are prepared to submit curriculum vitae and other necessary papers on the candidates if it is so desired. It was not so desired, and the waiting process with fruitless letters continued. And when finally the Polish government relented, Staszek's letter to me announcing the news, beginning with hurrah, ended with this remarkable paragraph. And I invite you to notice the shifts of subject and scale. This is as follows. Over and above all that, I have a strong feeling that after all those grim years, this is a start of something better, and that my people, who won it with their own hands, certainly deserve it. That is the main reason why, for the first time, I am writing to you in a really good mood and with real hope. Forgive me once more all the grammar mistakes and too many commas. Warmest regards of all possibilities ever, Stanisław Barańczak. And then the microscopic signature, that final gesture of modesty of a man who had so little to be modest about, and who graced this department in this university for nearly 2 decades thereafter.